So the NBA draft lottery happened on Thursday, and we now know the exact order that all teams will be picking in when the draft happens in October. There weren't too many surprises, with it mostly going chalk until the Charlotte Hornets and the Chicago Bulls both jumped into the top 4. Joining them there are the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Golden State Warriors, both of which were projected to be in the top 4 picks. The other notable thing that happened is that the Boston Celtics will be picking 14th in place of the Memphis Grizzlies, as the Grizzlies conveyed their pick to the Celtics this year after not jumping into the top 4 because the pick was top 4 protected. We now know that the Minnesota Timberwolves will have their choice of any prospect in the draft at number 1 overall, followed by the Golden State Warriors, the Charlotte Hornets, the Chicago Bulls, and the Cleveland Cavaliers. According to most people, there seems to be 3 players in contention for the number 1 overall draft spot, and those are Anthony Edwards, James Wiseman, and LaMelo Ball. Anthony Edwards is considered to be one of the best scoring talents in the draft, averaging around 19 points per game in his lone season at Georgia. Standing 6'5", 225 pounds, he's athletic and skilled, and projects as a score-first guard with defensive potential. He'll need to improve his overall efficiency and maximize his defensive potential if he wants to become a star in this league, but he definitely has some solid skills that you would look for as a player targeting with the number 1 overall pick. Before the college season started, many projected James Wiseman as the likely number 1 overall choice, but after playing only 3 games at Memphis this season, that status is a little bit up in the air. He's an athletic defensive anchor, and playing the center position, it would make sense for some teams in the top 5 to target him. I would assume that a lot of teams would want to get a little bit of a better look at Wiseman before seriously considering drafting him, but with the combines coming up, I'm sure teams will get their chance to evaluate and really consider whether he's worth that top draft pick. He'll need to work on rounding out his offensive game by adding a jump shot and more ways to score, but if he can continue to develop, he'll be one of those scary centers that's hard to stop on both ends of the court. And then there's the notorious LaMelo Ball, who is one of the most polarizing draft prospects in recent memory. Ever since his brother Lonzo came into the league a couple of years ago, LaMelo Ball has been waiting for his turn in the spotlight, and over the past few seasons he's been working on his game, trying to prove that he's worthy of consideration for a top draft choice this year. After spending a season in Australia with the Illawarra Hawks, LaMelo has shown that he's a skilled offensive player, but his shooting and passing are inconsistent at best, and he still needs to prove that he can carry an offense by himself with efficiency and consistency. LaMelo doesn't lack skill, and standing at 6'7", he's a tall guard. There's definitely a team that's willing to take a chance on him in the top 5, we're just not sure who it is yet. To me, these are the 3 most likely options for the number 1 overall pick. We never know what the Timberwolves are going to do, maybe they even decide to trade back, but if I was them, I'd sit at number 1 and decide between these 3 options. To me, the most likely choice is Anthony Edwards, and I'll tell you why. I don't think the Timberwolves will draft James Wiseman simply because of the fact that they already have Karl Anthony Towns on the roster. It's tough to play 2 centers together in today's NBA, and Wiseman doesn't project well next to Towns because one of them would have to play power forward. I think it's a possibility that the Timberwolves decide to go with 2 towers, but in my opinion it's much more likely that they'll steer away from Wiseman simply because of his position. I also doubt they'll consider Ball simply because they have D'Angelo Russell on the roster. Ball seems to be a, no pun intended, ball-dominant point guard that needs the ball in his hands a lot to handle and score, and D'Angelo Russell kind of already fills that role for them. There was a lot of talk about whether or not D'Angelo Russell could play off-ball after he was teamed up with Stephen Curry on the Warriors last season. We didn't get to see much of the two together, but it didn't seem like it was a great fit in the few games that we saw. The Warriors elected to trade Russell in part because they felt like he wouldn't fit with Steph Curry, and so the Timberwolves drafting another ball-dominant guard to pair with D'Angelo Russell just a year after he was traded because of that exact reason doesn't really make much sense to me. I would go with Anthony Edwards simply because he seems like he's a better fit to play off-ball than LaMelo is. He's a more natural scoring talent off-ball, and with his size and explosiveness around the rim, I think it would make sense for them to go with a guy who they feel like doesn't need the ball in his hands a lot to thrive in their offense. So I think the Timberwolves stay there and pick Edwards at 1. I'm not sure if they're thrilled about it. Maybe they even consider trading down if another team lower in the order falls in love with Edwards or Wiseman or Ball and really wants to move up to make sure that they get him. If I was the Timberwolves, I definitely would consider doing that. But as of right now, I would just keep the number 1 overall pick and draft Edwards. And if an offer comes across the table that blows you away, maybe you take that. Now, the Golden State Warriors at number 2 are in a very interesting spot because they may decide to trade their pick, and in my opinion, I think it's very likely that they do just that. If you couldn't tell by all my clothing items already, I'm a Warriors fan. And I think they have the resources to go for a big play this offseason, making a trade using either their traded player exception to get a player in that salary range, or using one of their bigger contracts to swing for the fences and trade for a star. Obviously, the dream would be to get somebody like Joel Embiid, Bradley Beal, or even Giannis Antetokounmpo. Now, those are more like Twitter memes and kind of unlikely pipe dreams, but in the event that one of those stars becomes unhappy with their situation and asks out, the Warriors have the ammunition to go get it. With the number 2 overall pick this year, they have Minnesota's pick next season, that big traded player exception, they have the contracts for Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green that they could potentially flip, so they can actually go out and do something big. I think the most likely event is that they trade down with somebody else in the lottery and use that traded player exception to snag a player that fits into that salary range. It's around $17.5 million per season that they can get without sending out any money in return. Off the top of my head, a couple targets would be Kelly Oubre from the Phoenix Suns, JJ Redick from the New Orleans Pelicans, Rudy Gay or Patty Mills from the San Antonio Spurs, and Marcus Smart from the Boston Celtics. If any of those teams were willing to give up those players and their pick to move up to number 2 and let the Warriors trade down to that 11 to 14 range, I think Golden State would definitely consider doing that. To me, the ideal target is Marcus Smart from Boston. I know that their fans love him, and I'm sure ownership does too, but it seems like a very Danny Ainge move to me to use Marcus Smart to trade up in the draft after falling in love with one of the top prospects. We saw what he was willing to do for Justice Winslow a couple of years ago. What happens if Ainge really decides that he loves James Wiseman or he loves LaMelo Ball? Wiseman would be a natural fit for their hole at center, and maybe LaMelo Ball is just that talented of a prospect that Ainge just has to get his hands on him. You can never really tell, and these are deals that will go down on the night of the lottery, so we won't know for a while, but these are possibilities that come to mind when you think of the Golden State Warriors trading out of that number 2 slot. So I don't think the Warriors will be actually making the pick at number 2 overall, but if they did, I think they would probably go with Wiseman over Ball. I'm not a big fan of drafting for need and more going for the best player available, but if you're looking at the Warriors roster, it's clear that they really don't need a player like Ball with both Stephen Curry and Klay Thompson on the roster, and Wiseman would be a more natural fit for their team, sliding into that center position, and he'd be able to be athletic and more of a rim roller, as opposed to Ball, who would be a ball-dominant guard and would need more touches competing with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Andrew Wiggins, those type of players. Because there's so much uncertainty at number 2, it's tough to project what the Charlotte Hornets will do at number 3, but I think they would take any of those 3 players that are left there if the other 2 get picked up in the first 2 spots. They really don't have that much on their roster, so I don't think they'd be drafting for need. Sure, they have Terry Rozier and Devontae Graham at guard, but I don't think that would stop them from taking either Edwards or Ball if they were available at 3rd overall. Devontae Graham projects as more of a 6th man scorer off the bench type role for me, and I don't think they're married to Terry Rozier as their point guard of the future. I think Wiseman would also be a consideration if he was there, simply just going by best player available strategy, and the Hornets don't really have a center on their roster to write home about. So if I had to bet right now what the top 3 of the draft would look like, I would bet Anthony Edwards going number 1, the Warriors trading down with somebody who wants to move up and select LaMelo Ball, and the Hornets taking James Wiseman at 3rd. Another candidate to trade up, which I didn't mention earlier, would be the New York Knicks. They fell down to drafting 8th overall after finishing with the 6th worst record in the league. It's another year of disappointing lottery luck for the Knicks, but they've been linked to LaMelo Ball in rumors for a long time now. Ball seems like a natural fit in New York. He's popular, skilled, and flashy, all of which are hallmarks of New York basketball. If they were able to trade up and get their hands on him, he'd seem like a natural fit on a pretty bare roster to lead this team into their new era. The Knicks have a couple of draft picks from the Kristaps Porzingis trade that they could use to potentially move up in the draft order. An interesting idea would possibly be trying to interest the Warriors in trading for Julius Randle. He doesn't quite fit into their traded player exception, but there's a couple options there. The Warriors would first trade for an expiring contract that fits into their traded player exception, and then flip that player for Julius Randle. It would work under the rules for trading, where the salaries would have to be close enough, not exactly the same. So they would trade for somebody making around $17.5 million a year. Somebody like James Johnson from the Timberwolves. There's other options. And then flipping James Johnson for Julius Randle. That salary would work and match up. It's an idea floated for the Warriors when trading for players like Aaron Gordon, who are a little bit out of their price range as well, so that's an option for them. Is Randle the kind of player that the Warriors would be interested in? I'm really not sure. He's a little bit inefficient, but that's kind of besides the point. The point is that the Knicks have some ammunition to move up in the draft. They have these players on contracts that they could potentially interest teams higher up in getting, some specifically the Warriors, because they're a contender. Randall fits more on a contender than on a bad Knicks team. Maybe the Warriors decide they want him. I'm not sure, but I consider that to be an option for the Knicks and the Warriors as well. So if New York decides that they really want LaMelo Ball that badly, and according to some reports it seems like they do, they have a couple of options to trade up in the draft. Maybe it's with the Timberwolves, maybe it's with the Warriors, maybe it's even down with a team like the Chicago Bulls at 4. But they definitely have the option to do that if they really want to go for it. But past those 3 players, the draft really gets murky. There's a lot of decent, 3-and-D wings, solid point guards, and solid defenders littered throughout the draft. None of them are, projected to be superstars or these top-level players, but you can definitely get a quality player, a quality role player, at 4th pick or later. I'll just throw out a couple names. Players like Devin Vassell, players like Denny Avdia, players like Killian Hayes, Tyrese Halliburton, Tyrese Maxey as well, stuff like that. There's definitely options for these players, and the Bulls are really going to have their pick of a lot of different players at number 4 overall. I am anticipating that Edwards and Wiseman and Ball will all be gone by the time the Bulls pick. So I think they'll really have, their pick of the litter between the rest of the players. And there's some good options there too. So I definitely am expecting movement at the top of the draft order. I anticipate the Warriors to trade down. The Timberwolves, I think there's a chance that they do as well. I think the Hornets will probably stay put. I think they just kind of will go with best player available strategy. Maybe if they fall in love with one of the 3, they consider trading up to 1st overall, or just trading up one spot with the Warriors to ensure that they get the player that they want. But I really think that they won't trade down. If anything, they will trade up. And that's pretty much how I anticipate the top 3 to go. But there's quite a few teams in this lottery who have a chance to add some good level talent while still remaining a contender for the playoffs and even the title next season. Of course, the Warriors, back and healthy, they're a championship contender regardless of what they do with this 2nd overall pick. They're only here because of injury in the first place, and they will be back with a fury next season. The Phoenix Suns, I just talked about them last week, but they almost made the playoffs, and they've shown that this young core can really take them places. So adding another top 10 pick, they'll be able to continue to grow, continue to develop. Maybe they decide to trade that pick for an established player because they already have this young core. I'm not sure what they decide to do with it, but that team definitely has options there as well. And then near the end of the lottery, you have teams like the Celtics and the Pelicans. The Celtics, of course, are already a great team. They only have this pick because of that trade with the Grizzlies. And the Pelicans have Zion Williamson. They're only continuing to get better. They missed the playoffs this year, but with a new head coach next year and another year of health, hopefully, and development for Zion Williamson, they should be right back in the mix next season. And so this lottery pick, they have a chance to add another young player to their already solid young core. By the way, I mentioned that my next season preview video will be on the New Orleans Pelicans. That one's still on the way. The lottery happened today, so I figured that I would talk about that because I had a lot of ideas and thoughts about what went down tonight. So Pelicans is coming soon, and that's going to be it for my video on the draft lottery. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll be back with the Pelicans in a couple days. See ya.